My name is Daniella Zalcman, and I'm reporting from Canada on the public health legacy of the Indian residential school system. I first became interested in Canada's First Nations population while attending the AIDS 2014 conference in Melbourne. I found some studies on the HIV prevalence rates in Indigenous Canadian communities and was shocked to see that the numbers were nearly on par with those from sub-Saharan African nations. But unlike in much of sub-Saharan Africa, where prevalence rates are lowering, HIV is on the rise among First Nations peoples. Even when examining similar Indigenous populations in countries with parallel colonial histories, so the US, New Zealand, Australia, Canada's HIV numbers are as much as 10 times higher. I couldn't figure out why this might be the case. Canada has one of the best healthcare systems in the world and has pioneered some of the most successful harm reduction strategies that exist. So I spent a month traveling through British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, and almost immediately saw a pattern among every HIV-positive Aboriginal Canadian I met. They were all survivors of Canada's infamous residential school system. For more than 150 years, the Canadian government ran a system of forced assimilation boarding schools in conjunction with Catholic, Anglican, and Presbyterian churches. Young Indigenous Canadians were forcibly taken from their reserves and sent to boarding schools where they wouldn't be able to see their families for months or even years at a time. They were made to emulate Western Canadian culture in every way, and punishments were severe if they didn't comply. They were forbidden from speaking their own languages, from practicing their own religions, or from engaging in any traditional First Nations customs whatsoever. In June of 2015, a government-funded Truth and Reconciliation Commission announced the results of a 7-year-long study of the residential school system and concluded that the experiences of more than 150,000 Indigenous Canadians constituted cultural genocide. As a direct result of forced assimilation, children forgot their own languages, their own traditions, and their own cultures. The multi-generational consequences were dire as well. Children who had been raised isolated from their parents and from normal home lives grew up not knowing how to be parents themselves. Physical and sexual abuse, which was rampant in many residential schools, evolved into lateral violence. Multiple generations of Indigenous Canadians became so removed from their own heritage that they essentially lost all sense of identity. Loss of identity leads to low self-esteem, which leads to a general disregard for one's own health and safety. A higher than average percentage of First Nations Canadians engage in high-risk behavior, whether that manifests itself through unsafe injection drug use or unsafe sex practices, which in turn leads to elevated rates of HIV, hepatitis, and other communicable diseases. This project is an attempt to explore the impacts of cultural genocide and also to look at the ways in which First Nations communities are trying to recover. There's an ongoing cultural revival happening across Canada, with languages and rituals being reincorporated into daily life. This is an exploration of what it means to destroy a collective identity and how to go about reclaiming it.